Hi guys, how are you all? Welcome back to another TOEFL speaking class. So today we're going to be looking at tasks 4 and 6. All right, so tasks 4 and 6 are quite similar because they both involve listening to lectures and speaking about academic topics. So task 4 is about summarizing a reading and a lecture. You're going to have 45 seconds to read a passage that's displayed on your screen. Then you're going to listen to a related lecture, 30 seconds to prepare your response, which is a summary, and then 60 seconds to actually summarize what you've read and heard. The passage will introduce the topic and give general background to it. And the lecture will basically add more information. It'll give more specific details related to the same topic. Now, before we get into the structure of your response, it's not necessary to have any knowledge of that particular topic. The topics could be absolutely anything related to what you might hear in a first year undergraduate or freshman year lecture. Could be related to anything to do with social science, humanities, natural science, things like that. But everything you need to know is going to be given to you in the lecture. So how do you structure your response when you're giving a summary for this task? The first thing you need to do is introduce the passage, meaning what's the topic? So the passage will tell you what the topic is about, and it might include a few points that you can quickly summarize. Or it may just give you a general overview. In that case, you'll just say the topic of the reading is, and then whatever it is. Then you're going to introduce the lecture. You're going to explain what the lecture does. The lecture supports the passage by adding more information. The lecture contradicts the passage by giving maybe opposing theories, or the lecture elaborates on the passage by giving more details and examples. So the lecture will usually do one of those things. And then you need to summarize the 3 points in the lecture. So the lecture will usually discuss 3 main points related to the general topic. So listen carefully as you hear the lecture, because the lecturer will give you clues. Usually they'll transition between each idea using words like, firstly, I'd like to talk to you about, next, we're going to talk about, and finally, I'd like to discuss. Things like that to sort of give you clues as to when one idea ends and the next one begins. So that'll help you in your note-taking. And that brings us to note-taking. Okay, so with the reading, you may want to take notes. You don't have to with the reading. The main thing is to note down the topic. So what is the reading actually about? What is it introducing? So the example is like this. So on your screen, you're going to be given a box, which is going to contain a short passage. You'll have 45 seconds to read it, and you'll see your counter, your timer, counting down here in the top right-hand corner. Then you're going to listen to a lecture, which will look something like this, and you'll be able to see the length of the lecture displayed at the bottom there in this kind of bar. Then you're going to have your question show up on the screen. And it will tell you how much preparation time and how much recording time you have. In this case, 30 seconds prep, 60 seconds recording. And then your timer is going to start. So let's practice. You've got 45 seconds to read this passage, taking notes if you like, and your time starts now. Okay, so what's the main idea or the topic that the passage is introducing? The passage is introducing archaeology and technology, or the link between technology and archaeology. So now you have an idea of what to expect from the lecture. So get your notes ready, because you're going to hear a lecture about archaeology and technology, and you will need to take notes, listening out for main ideas and details.
So I'm going to talk to you about some of the archaeological discoveries made with the help of modern technology. Firstly, NASA provides sophisticated high-tech tools that archaeologists are making use of. NASA's satellite imagery has been used to search for Mayan ruins in southern Mexico and Central America. They've also made use of ground-penetrating radar, which sends electromagnetic pulses underground to spot signals reflected by buried structures. These radars allow scientists to create images of what exists below ground. Also, in northwestern New Mexico, archaeologists have used drone aircraft equipped with thermal imaging cameras to identify the walls and passages of a 1,000-year-old settlement buried beneath the dirt. These drones have also captured thermal images of man-made caves made by ancient Egyptians. So, what is so special about these new technological advances in archaeology? Well, one of the advantages of these new tools is that they are touch-free. This means that searchers can scrutinize large areas without disturbing them and accidentally destroying valuable material. Another potential advantage of high-tech archaeology is that despite the cost of sophisticated equipment, it saves time and manpower.
Okay, you should have picked up on three main points in the lecture. So let's now take a look at the prompt. So you need to now explain the relationship between archaeology and technology and how the information given by the lecture expands on it. You're going to have 30 seconds to prepare. Remember the structure: introduce the passage and then introduce the lecture. What does the lecture do? Support the passage or elaborate on the passage. And then what are the three main points that the lecturer discusses? Some vocabulary that you might want to consider is: the passage introduces, the passage defines what as what, the lecturer elaborates on this by discussing or according to the lecture, or the lecture discusses three main points, and then you can introduce these points by firstly, secondly, and finally. Okay, you have 30 seconds now to use that suggested vocabulary and your notes to explain the relationship between archaeology and technology and how the information in the lecture expands on the passage. Okay, your preparation time is up. You can now either speak your response out loud or record your response on your telephone using a voice recorder. But either way, as long as you actually practice speaking your response out loud. And your time starts now. Okay, time's up. What we're going to do now is listen to 2 sample responses. Same student. The first response is going to be a weak response, and we're going to evaluate it. We're going to give it a score and discuss why it got that score. And the second response is a stronger response. And again, we're going to evaluate that and discuss why it got that score. All right, so let's listen to the first sample response.
So the lecturer actually explained that NASA has been given like materials, their tools, and that there is a relationship between what they have discovered and the new tools based from like the history, when they discovered that the people in the past has used some technologies in order for them to come up with they use tools in order for them to come up with like, for example, the building, the structures. That I think that's it.
Okay, what did you think? Out of 1 to 4, or on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest, what would you rate that response? And also think about why. Okay, I'll show you how I rated that response. I gave that response a 1 out of 4. Why? Because the speech was marked by at least 2 of the 3 following. Let's first look at delivery. The delivery was fragmented and there were lots of pauses and false starts, okay, where the speaker sort of started to say something and then stopped and then started again and then stopped. So that's sort of resulted in fragmented delivery. The range of grammar and vocabulary was limited. Basically, the speaker didn't really say much. The message was impeded. We weren't really able to sort of get a lot of information. And they didn't really display a range of grammar or vocabulary. Also, there was limited relevant content. Firstly, there was a very, very limited summary. They didn't capture all of the main points. And there was also some inaccurate details there. So they were just kind of saying names like NASA and archaeology and technology, but they weren't really linking them together. Okay, so that's why that speaker got a 1. Okay, let's listen to a better response now. Second time lucky for that speaker.
So the passage introduces new technologies used in modern archaeology. The lecturer elaborates on this by discussing different discoveries made using these new technologies. Firstly, NASA has given high-tech tools, such as satellite imagery, which archaeologists have used to find ancient ruins in Mexico. They also used radars to see underground to find structures buried there. Secondly, archaeologists have also used drone aircraft to take thermal images on ancient sites in New Mexico and Egypt. Finally, the lecturer mentions the benefits of such technologies, such as allowing archaeologists to survey large areas without disturbing or destroying the site or what is buried underneath.
Okay, what did you think of that one? On a scale of 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest, what would you give the response you just heard? And think about why. And as you do that, I will show you what I gave it, which is a 4. In this case, the speaker achieved all of the following. The delivery was well paced and the pronunciation was clear. There was nothing in there that I didn't understand, and there were no false starts or pauses. It was quite fluent. Let's look at the second point. Effective use of grammar and vocabulary, some minor errors, but they don't affect meaning. So the choice of words and the structure of the sentences was all very accurate. The response was well developed, so it means that he actually summarized all of the main ideas, and there was a clear progression. So I could sort of really tell that the speaker knew what they were talking about and supported their ideas with details from the lecture. Okay, that brings us to task 6. Task 6 is summarize lecture. Very similar to the one we just looked at, which is task 4, except it doesn't involve a reading passage. So you just will listen to a lecture, prepare your response, and then summarize the lecture. So the structure of your response could follow something like this. Introduce the topic, so what's the lecture about? Introduce the first main idea and the supporting details, the second main idea and supporting details, and then the third main idea, which is missing from the flowchart, but yes, third main idea with supporting details. Some suggested vocabulary for this task. The lecture is about. The professor illustrates this concept using 3 main points. Firstly, he or she, depending on if it's male or female, talks about. He or she says that. To introduce your details. Secondly, he or she speaks about, and then he or she notes that to speak about details. And then you can say thirdly or finally, the lecturer discusses, and then the third and final point. So these kinds of phrases will help you to stay on track in your response. Note taking. So when you're listening, write down the topic. The lecturer will always introduce the topic in the beginning of the lecture. So what is the lecture about? And then what are the 3 points that the lecture uses? You can put them on the left side of your page, and then on the right-hand side of the page, any details related to those points. Let's look at an example of task 6. So it's going to appear on your screen as an image of a lecture, and it's going to play automatically for you. And then your prompt is going to appear. And usually the prompt is something like this. Using points and examples from the lecture, describe the theories discussed by the professor. And it'll always give you your preparation and your recording time. All right, ready to practice. Listen to the lecture. So get your notes ready.
If you take a good look, it may surprise you to learn how many of the objects that surround you every day were originally invented thousands of years ago by ancient advanced civilizations. Here are 3 of the most useful objects and ideas that we owe to the ancients. We'll start off with paper. As early as 3000 BC, Egyptians had developed a technique for making paper from the pith of the papyrus plant. Long strips were woven together and weighted down to bind them into a strong, thin sheet. The Egyptians also invented pens made of cut reeds, which were strong enough to write on the papyrus, and mixed soot or other organic material with beeswax and vegetable gum to make ink. Now for zero. The idea to use a zero-like symbol as a placeholder to show the difference between 10 and 100, for example, emerged sometime after 300 BC in ancient Babylon. Half a world away in ancient Mesoamerica, the Maya came up with the idea of zero as a placeholder independently, around AD 350. They used it in their calendar systems, but like the Babylonians, didn't really conceive of zero as a number or use it in equations. The more complete vision of zero didn't emerge until the 7th century in India, when rules were developed to use it in mathematical equations. And finally, there's chocolate. This all-important invention comes from the beans of the cacao tree, which was cultivated more than 3,000 years ago by the peoples of ancient Mesoamerica. These civilizations used the tree's fruit, the cocoa bean, to prepare a frothy beverage they considered an energy drink and mood enhancer. In the 16th century, Spanish conquistadors seeking gold and silver in the New World brought chocolate back to Europe with them, launching a craze that, well, let's be honest, never really ended.
All right, it is now time to prepare your response. And your prompt is, using points and examples from the lecture, describe the theories discussed by the professor. Prepare your response. Now, you might want to consider the structure as you do so. Introduce the topic, summarize point 1, then provide details, summarize point 2, provide details, and then summarize point 3 and provide details. And your time starts now. Preparation time is over. It is now time to record your response. You have 60 seconds. All right, let's now listen to a couple of sample responses, and you can compare those to your own. Again, as we did previously, we're going to hear 2 sample responses. The first one will be on the lower end of the scale, and the second one will be on the higher end of the scale. And as you listen, think about what's good or not so good about each of them. So, sample 1.
In the audio, the teacher was talking about 3 very different things. There were the paper, which was invented long ago, along with pen and ink, I think. There were, thin sheets from papyrus tree. And papyrus tree was good because it helped in making paper. Then the next one was zero. Zero was invented in India, and it was used for telling difference between 10, 100,000, 10,000. And last one, chocolate, which was made from cocoa tree, and people like chocolate, people like coffee, and they wanted to take it to rest of the world.
All right, what did you think? Out of a scale of 1, 2, 3, or 4, what would you have given that? All right, I'll put you out of the mystery. I gave that a 2. The speech was marked by at least two of the following. There was limited range of grammar and vocabulary that prevented full expression of ideas. The response was connected to the task, but there were some ideas that were limited or repetitious. So let's break that down. There were some limitations in grammar and vocabulary and some inaccuracies there. Also, when the speaker spoke about chocolate, there were limited details, so they didn't give enough information to summarize the points in the lecture. And there were also some irrelevant details that were included as well. When the speaker talked about zero, although he attempted to summarize the points, there was some inaccurate information. So for example, the speaker said that zero was invented in India, which was inaccurate. It was invented in ancient Babylon, but then refined later in India and used as a part of mathematical equations. And they also included extra details that actually weren't discussed in the lecture. So you want to avoid doing that. You only want to include information that you hear in the lecture. Okay, let's listen now to a second sample response.
The lecture is about three ancient inventions that we still use today: paper, zero, and chocolate. Firstly, the lecturer talks about paper and states that it was invented by the Egyptians in 3000 BC from a plant. The lecturer adds that the ancient Egyptians also invented pens made from reeds to write on the papyrus. Next, the lecturer states that the concept of zero was invented by the ancient Babylonians, and the Maya also came up with the same concept. However, it was the Indians who began using zero in mathematical equations. Finally, chocolate was invented in Mesoamerica over 3,000 years ago. It was made from the cocoa bean and prepared as a drink. The Spanish then brought chocolate with them back to Europe.
Okay, now obviously that was a high level response, and I gave that one a 4. So the delivery was well paced and the pronunciation was clear. It didn't require any effort to understand what he was saying. There was effective use of grammar and vocabulary, and the response was well developed. There was lots of relevant ideas there, so nothing that was irrelevant. And also the speaker included all of the main points that were discussed in the lecture. Now, when you're summarizing, you don't have to use the exact same words that the lecturer has used. So it's not about sort of copying down as you listen word for word. It's about capturing the idea and keywords. So how did you find those two tasks? Let's take a look at your questions. I see that there are some questions here. Yeah, okay, so some comments there related to the samples. Let's take a look here. Okay, do you find the evaluation rubric useful? So this one here. And when you listen, if you have recorded your responses on your phone, it would be a really good idea to go back and listen to yourself and see objectively where on this scale your response falls and why, and what you can do to sort of improve your response. Is it related to development? In that case, then you might want to consider structure and certain vocabulary to help guide your response. Is it related to your delivery? Are you limited in your pronunciation? Are you stopping and starting too much? You know, or is your speech nice and fluent? And I did mention a couple of lessons ago, a lot of people ask about accent. I wouldn't worry about accent. As you could hear, the sample students that you did, listen to, even in the higher responses that they gave, the 4s, there was still an accent, and that's unavoidable. It's just a matter of, does your accent impede understanding? Does it make it difficult for the speaker to understand your words? And if so, if your accent is heavier, then you might want to consider slowing your speech down just a little bit, to allow the speaker to sort of make sense of what it is that you're saying. But yeah, you don't want to speak too slowly either, because that's going to affect your pace. I look forward to seeing you all. Take care, have a good week, and practice. Bye.